Major support for these broadcasts is provided by the CUNY TV Foundation, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's window company, Capital One Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Geneva Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, M&T Bank, the Wyckoff Group, Chelsea Lighting, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional support is provided by Ackman Ziff Real Estate, AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi, USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International, NYC, Cushman & Wakefield, DDG, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Union Funding, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Hersha Hospitality Trust, Investors Bank, New Banks, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, John Katzimatidis, Red Apple Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, People's United Bank, Popular Community Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling & Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, and these friends.
So some people get their job through the New York Times. Some people go to school up in Plattsburgh, New York. But how do they become and develop probably one of the largest specialty medical practices in New York? I'm fortunate today to have Bob Glazer, who's the CEO of ENT Allergy Associates. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about your grandparents, how they came here. I know they came from Europe. Tell me about them.
My father's side were actually French and Polish Jews that came over in that, large immigration in the early 1900s and settled initially on the Lower East Side. And
you were saying Allen Street or something?
Allen Street, and then subsequently in Brooklyn. My grandmother actually passed away when my dad was only 2 years old. And my grandfather on my father's side subsequently remarried and had another 5 kids. So he was one of 10 children.
Now, you mentioned to me that part of the family only spoke French, right?
My father's side were French Jews. My mother's side were Sephardic Jews, and they only spoke Spanish, or what's known as Ladino. And they immigrated over in 1911. My grandfather was actually smuggled out of what today is probably Serbia. But was then part of the Ottoman Empire. And my grandmother came over, I think, about a year later and immigrated to 101 Allen Street down on the Lower East Side.
And where'd your parents grow up?
Both my parents were born in Brooklyn. Again, Lower East Side, my grandfather initially at 101 Allen Street, which is still there today. I actually visited it. And I know that because actually a genealogist went and researched the ship records and found on the ship record where my grandfather, when he first came into Ellis Island, it noted that he went to 101 Allen Street. So initially down there selling scarves on a push cart, and wound up in the garment district, and eventually moved out to Brooklyn, Bensonhurst, where he grew his family.
Your father, when he went into the air conditioning business, you said?
My dad was, one of 10 children, right? Grew up in Brooklyn, and World War II, volunteered and went into the Navy, and served on a PT boat. And they put him in the engine room, right? And so he came out after World War II, and he had a little bit of engineering and machinery background. And if you think back to that period of time, air conditioning was the new thing. And he came out of the Navy, and in early 1948, opened up a business with his brother in Flushing, Queens, Burmac Air Conditioning, and started a small air conditioning refrigeration contracting business.
Now, you were born in Brooklyn, you said, right?
I was actually born in Long Island. Both my brother and sister were born in Brooklyn. My parents moved out to Westbury, Long Island back in 1952, which was then potato fields.
People don't realize that Westbury was potato fields.
That's right. And actually, my father grew up with somebody named the Fortunoffs, if you might remember the family in Brooklyn, and they subsequently moved out to Westbury.
They used to be, you know, in East New York on Livonia Avenue, and then they subsequently opened up their first store in Westbury, and then they opened up the Source, and then, as in many businesses, sometimes through mergers and acquisitions, as opposed to what you did with ENT and Allergy Associates, they went bankrupt, the private equity.
And actually, I went to Hebrew school with Alan Fortunoff, one of the grandchildren.
Now, you told me you went to school in East Meadow, right?
I went to school in East Meadow, W. Trespett Clark, part of the East Meadow school systems. Graduated in 1972.
Now, while you were going to high school, you told me that you went to work with your dad in Flushing. Part of it was learning the air conditioning and also probably learning that you didn't want to be in the air conditioning business, and also driving. You had a lot of fun driving trucks.
You know, I worked for a couple of summers for my dad as a kid. Initially, you know, going up in those attics and dealing with very hot, un-air conditioned areas, and back into commercial refrigeration units in large restaurants. I did that for, I think, a summer or two, and I really decided I didn't want to do that. And my dad then put me in the office to answer the phone and do the bookkeeping. So the business side of me kind of kicked in then. I actually helped him grow his air conditioning filter business. But as part of that, it was delivering stuff around the filters around Queens and Brooklyn. And so as a kid, I really got to know the streets of New York, whether it was Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan. And I would tell you that was a terrific learning experience for me, because as I get around, and now I put on 30,000 miles a year just driving to our different sites, it's really all about timing and knowing which roads are best to travel on.
So you graduate high school. How do you decide to go up to Plattsburgh, New York? I mean, some people say, you know, I want to go to a state university, but Plattsburgh?
Yeah. You know, my parents were not wealthy by any means. I grew up, and they, you know, they helped each of us, go to college. But my brother, who's older than I am, he went to McGill University for a year up in Canada, Montreal. And I recall, as we were driving him up there, up the Northway, through the Adirondacks, how much I enjoyed the environment as we were driving him up there. So when I started applying for schools, and at that time, most of the state university colleges, you're looking at Fredonia or Oswego and
Oneonta.
You know, Oneonta, they were all upstate, and one of them was Plattsburgh, and they had a business program, and I said, you know, I passed by there. That's a pretty spot, and applied and got in.
And what you do during the summers when you were working in the air conditioning business?
You know, I think initially my dad still had his business then. I worked for him for maybe a summer or two, and then I transitioned. My brother at the time was working in healthcare administration on the mental health side, and I actually worked at some of the centers for those people that are mentally challenged, and did that for, I think, both my junior year and my senior year in college.
So it's 1976. You get a Bachelor of Science in Business from the State University, and right now you have to find a job. What happened? You were searching through the New York Times?
So, you know, and I think a lot of kids face that today. You get out of school, it's somewhat, you know, going to college, you really have tremendous amounts of freedom and no responsibilities, but the party's over. And you come home and you have to say to yourself, okay, I just had 4 great years away with really a growing up experience, right? It's reality. I got to get a job and make a living, and I don't want to live in my parents' house. So I came home that summer, and I think I did work at the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene through August. And I said, this is not what I want to do. I really want to get on the business side of things. and started doing what people do in 1976 when you're looking for a job. Open up the Sunday Times
That's
in the
when
employment
they had an
section.
employment section that was like 30 pages. Now there's 3 pages.
That's correct. And those ads were
pre-Monster,
That's absolutely right. And there was a little ad in there. You know, maybe it was 2.5 inches long by 3 lines, and it was I answered an ad for NYU Medical Center that was advertising for a position called Grants Management Specialist. And I sent my resume in, and they called me and said, come on in for an interview.
So what do you do in grants administration at that time?
So again, I was lucky enough, I got the job. My mother dressed me up and bought me a 3-piece corduroy suit, and I went in, and I guess I wowed them enough, they made me an offer. I think my first salary, 1976, $9,800 a year, right? Commuted into the city. And Grants Contracts Administration is really helping physicians apply to whether it's the NIH or the NIMH or local foundations that are giving money toward medical research, helping them put together the applications from a business perspective, working on their budgets, making sure all the documents that are required by the funding organization are there. You have specific deadlines to meet. And the researchers at all these institutions, they're trying to, there's a limited amount of money even back then, and it's very competitive. And meeting those deadlines and getting that stuff in on time and tracking the responses, that's what Grants and Contracts does.
Now, one of the benefits of working for NYU Medical Center is that you're able to get a graduate degree and it's paid for.
That's correct.
And you subsequently, you left the house and you found an apartment on 27th Street and Lexington Avenue, when the neighborhood was a little different, as one would say.
Yep. You know, it was back in 1976, 77, I think I commuted from home for about 6 months, and my office was on 34th and 1st, and I found a walk-up apartment, 3rd floor walk-up on 27th and Lex. It's a great area to be in right now. Back then it was a red light district, and tough neighborhood. But it was a 7-block walk to my office, and when I decided to apply and get accepted to NYU's grad program down in the Greenwich Village campus, it was a walk to campus.
And it was a great way you got your master's over there, correct?
Yes. So again, one of the benefits of NYU at the time was if you matriculated into an evening program, you could get that as part of a fringe benefit. And I earned my master's over 3 years at night going to school.
And if you had kids at that time and you stayed at NYU for the rest of your life, you could have even had their tuition.
That's correct.
Because the guy who you work for, who we know, Ira Goodman, who's now in California, he went for a couple of degrees, and his son went to undergraduate and got his master's and his medical degree.
Yeah, it's a great benefit. And back then, it wasn't even a taxable benefit. So today, they still have those benefits at many of the universities. But they're a taxable benefit today.
So NYU, you're in grants, then you get involved with the charitable division, the Department of Development, and then you get into a variety of divisions, and you're there for about 7 years, you said, right?
I was there actually 9 years. Worked in the controllers division. Actually was asked to administer the Department of Pediatrics and OBGYN for the School of Medicine, and those offices were actually in Bellevue at the time. If you remember Bellevue back in this period of time, my office was there. And subsequently, this is now the late 70s, early 80s, PCs suddenly became the hot thing to get involved in, and I wanted to be involved in breakthrough technology. So NYU was trying to computerize their donation programs to track who are they getting donations from and where are they going, and develop databases on that. And I got involved in a project to develop the software and track donations for the medical center.
Then you get Columbia. How does that happen?
So 9 years, you know, a couple of different jobs at NYU. I had gotten my master's. Now I'm in my mid-20s. Time for a change. Started sending out some resumes, and I got called by a recruiter. And he said he was recruiting for a job up at Columbia Presbyterian in their fundraising arm, where they needed a director of administration to put back together their accounting and their computer systems. And again, went on the interview. I was in the right spot at the right time. It's interesting, I recently got an email from that recruiter who just retired. And he said to me, "You were my most successful recruit in my entire career. Now that I'm retiring, I needed to let you know that."
That's nice.
So a guy named Stephen Enton. I always, he got me the job, got me the first spot.
Now, when you're there, you get involved with the Milstein Hospital and some other projects.
So again, this is now mid-1980s. The hospital modernization program is underway. The Milstein Hospital is in the process of opening. I get involved on the, again, CPMC fund is really the fundraisers who are trying to raise massive amounts of capital donations to fund the building project there. And I believe that was over $100 million project back then to open up the Milstein Hospital. I was there on the fundraising side, and as part of the fundraising side, CPMC fund managed endowment funds for both Columbia University School of Medicine and the Presbyterian Hospital in the city of New York. So there was about...
That's right, this is before the mergers.
That's right.
They were two separate entities at this time.
That's right. And so they had a, for standards of what you hear these days in endowment funds, relatively small. The CPMC fund was managing about $65 million of endowment funds. So I got a little bit of a new knowledge. I got introduced to the investment banking world and the so-called captains of industry, the folks that were on the board of Columbia Presbyterian who were at Merrill Lynch and Chase and American Express. And I got to know because I attended all of this organization's board meetings and finance committee meetings at the time. So I got an introduction to those trustees who were also trustees of Presbyterian Hospital in the state of New York and Columbia Presbyterian's health centers. And it was through that and through the then executive vice president up at Columbia Presbyterian, a guy named Joe Corcoran, that Joe asked me to come on board as the assistant treasurer at Presbyterian Hospital. They were, the assistant treasurer had been there prior to that, was retiring. So I was in the right spot at the right time, and certainly I would say that that first year and a half at CPMC Fund, I put back together a mess and got it organized.
Then you get involved with the United Hospital up
right
where you were living up in Westchester at this time.
Right.
And then from there, you went to ProHealth?
ProHealth.
Which was a multi-group practice.
Multi-specialty group practice.
You're leaving ProHealth, and what happens?
Sure. So, I left Presbyterian, I went over to United Hospital, and I got introduced to the physician management side of things and took a liking to that. I got recruited to go to ProHealth when they first opened up. And again, they're a multi-specialty group practice on Lake Success, run by a physician named David Cooper. He's still there, and as you know, ProHealth is huge these days. But I was commuting from Chappaqua to Lake Success, and it was a startup, and I was spending enormous amounts of time out there. I had young children, and I got a call from another recruiter who happened to have my name from someone else that, again, I had met through my career actually at CPMC Fund. And they called me and they said, gee, there's a startup, ENT MSO, Management Services Organization.
ENT, okay, ear, nose, and throat, right?
That's correct.
And what were they? How many people were they?
So at the time, it was an MSO, a Management Services Organization. It consisted of 10 physician ENT practices, all over the New York metro area. And it was called Physicians Domain. And the concept was that these physicians were going to fund a back office operation and to be able to do better billing and collection because managed care had entered the market.
Right, negotiate better fees.
And they were getting killed.
Else.
They were getting killed. So I
and
get this call.
They were even owned by a publicly held company at this time.
Subsequent to me joining them, I joined at a period of time where they were having severe cash flow problems, and they actually wound up owing the bank quite a bit of money. There was a call for cash, and Again, a lot of the physicians didn't stick around. And the core group, three groups totaling 12 physician partners, stuck around, actually sold their assets to a publicly traded practice management company in Atlanta, Georgia, called Physician Specialty Corp. It's no longer around. And Physician Specialty Corp reorganized the management. And actually, I was hired by Physician Specialty Corp to manage the New York operation. PSC, Physician Specialty Corp, had about a dozen ENT practices east of the Mississippi. We were, in fact, the New York practice for them. And PSC helped us put ENT Associates. It was the first organization name was ENT Associates in 1999. And I remember at the time that I would get phone calls and people would say, well, you know, is this an accounting firm? Is this a consulting firm, ENT Associates? So within a year, I convinced the board we needed to change the name to ENT and Allergy Associates. And it clicked for the patient population.
But how do you grow a business? I mean, from 12 physicians to today, 160 physicians?
Today we're 140. I hope to be 165 next year.
And how many offices?
39 offices, 700 employees. So slowly is the quick answer to that, because you don't move quickly. You make sure that you're diligent about ensuring that you have a program that works, so that each time you add that next group of physicians.
How many ENT specialists are in the country? Because we were talking about that. Part of, I mean, you're the CEO of ENT and Allergy Associates, but part of your job, one of your big jobs, is recruitment.
Sure.
And also another interesting thing is that ENT, because you're dealing with the head, neck, and throat, it's one step below a brain surgeon.
That's right. So just to give you some numbers on that, there's probably about 9,000 or 10,000 active otolaryngologists. That's what an ear, nose, and throat doctor is referred to in the country. Many of them in academic practices or multi-specialty group practices. And I spend most of my time at this point just doing recruiting and
How many
mergers.
years is the training program to be an ENT?
Right. So after you go through medical school, it's a 5-year residency program and could also then entail another 1 or 2 years of fellowship training for subspecialty care. If you look at the pool of otolaryngology residents that come out of that first 5 year of training, there's about, let's call it 300 residents per year in the entire country that come out of that kind of a program. It's very difficult.
And not everyone wants to live in New York City.
That's correct.
Or in the region.
So when I look at the numbers, 300 a year come out. About a third go into academic medical center practices. That leaves a pool of 200. Half go west of the Mississippi. So that leaves 100 opportunities for the entire East Coast. And I could tell you that ENT and allergy.
It's like the draft. It's like the NBA draft. You got to get the right player over there. You know,
Yeah.
Who's the #1 ENT from NYU?
That's right. And it's about, as you know in business, it's about relationship building. And I work really hard on relationship building from when these residents start in residency. I start to try and go meet them as they're going through their residency
You're in this
program.
association also where you do a lot of speaking around the country on ENT management and also on recruitment.
Yeah. I'm the past president of the Association of Otolaryngology Administrators. That represented 1,000 administrators across the whole country. But ENT and allergy, we are somewhat unique. We are the largest, not only in New York, but in the country. And it's by quite a bit, actually. Probably the next largest ear, nose, and throat group is in Miami, where you have 45 otolaryngologists. I think there's a 60-man group in Charlotte of both otolaryngologists and ophthalmologists.
When you went into the business originally in 1976, medicine, it was you know, what we would call, it was against ethics to advertise. And what happens now, you have the hospitals advertising, and there are a limited number of medical groups who are advertising. But if somebody watches television, listens to the radio, passes buses in the city or finds out about the allergy alert on 1010 Wins, it's ENT and Allergy Associates. Why? You've spent an enormous amount of money, which is a very small percentage of your total gross, but you've spent a great deal in branding.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
So I think, you're right. Medicine was never one to market itself for, I would tell you probably through the 1900s, into 2000, and suddenly it's a very competitive environment, not only on the hospital side, but on the physician side. There are groups all over, and you need to distinguish yourself. I would say first and foremost, you have to distinguish yourself by recruiting the best, right? And I spend a lot of time looking and making sure that we have the best candidates, that people who reach out to us and want to merge in, that they're quality physicians. But beyond that, once you get that, and you absolutely need to do that, we are in a competitive environment, and we're in an environment where, as our kids, they're clicking and going through the flashes of every brand, whether it's the Gap, whether it's Sloan Kettering, whether it's Merrill Lynch. It's a world of.
I'm going to tell you something very interesting. I was telling a dear friend of mine who's a very high-powered banker, and I was telling him that one of your clients, that you haven't met him, is I'm interviewing him. He says, I found my specialist in Boston through ENT. I went to see them. You referred me to somebody. I went to see them. So because of the network that you have, he says, I'm really happy about it. So the growth over there on the, as I said, when I work out in the gym early in the morning and I see the allergy alert or, on CBS News, and I think all of that's important. But you also said to me what's interesting is that you don't even have to recruit. Physicians come to you because they want to get into this group.
I think we've had a great run. And again, we're up to 140 physicians. I believe we'll be at somewhere between 160 and 165 next year, same time. But I think it is about recruiting top quality physicians, having a great business model. And I do get around. I'm up in Boston lecturing and down in D.C. I was in Philly last week. I'm going out to St. Louis
Now let's
next week.
talk a little bit about the family.
Sure.
1 minute left. You're married?
I'm married. I have a beautiful wife, Randy, that I met when she was working on Wall Street. I was working at NYU Medical Center at the time.
And you have two
And we have
siblings?
2 wonderful children. My daughter is a law student, Emma, at Cardozo. My son, Jonathan, actually just graduated from Franklin and Marshall. And Emma's living in the city. Jonathan's home for the summer. And I assume he's going to be doing what I did when I came out of college, starting to think about what am I going to do.
As opposed to a 3-story walk-up, I know of some 6-story walk-up, so it'll give him more exercise. So I'd like to say, it's really interesting from the kid who could have been in the air conditioning business, who found this job in the New York Times, to become the CEO of ENT and Allergy Associates. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.